If you've been fishing spinning gear and you're ready to give a baitcaster a try, don't stress over this. It's really not that hard. It's not complicated. The biggest thing you have to learn is how to keep the spool under control without spending your whole day picking out the backlashes, right? And that's the part that stresses everybody out, but it's really not that complicated. There are really only a few things you need to get right. You need to get the correct setup, so baitcaster rod and line. You need to make sure your brakes are set, and then you have to learn your thumb control. That's probably the most difficult part, but with the newer brakes, that's become even easier. And really, once you get those three things kind of working all together, the baitcaster, it just becomes second nature to you, just like the spinning rod. And you may wonder, well, why switch? Or you may just be thinking, I see baitcasters. What's the big deal about them? Why should I be using a baitcaster? And I'm going to tell you, spinning gear is great. I think every angler should know how to use it and should have some. But baitcasters have some advantages over spinning gear, and spinning gear has advantages over baitcasters as well. But we're talking about baitcasters, and what they do for you is they give you better accuracy once you get the hang of them. That thumb control right there gives you so much accuracy, the ability to drop a bait exactly where you want it. So, that's a real advantage there. They also handle heavier line and heavier cover better. And for things like pitching and flipping, Texas rigs, jigs, spinner baits, and just bigger lures overall, they just fit that job better overall. And that doesn't mean you need to get rid of the spinning gear, right? A lot of anglers use both, and that can be a real advantage to you. This is just about making the switch as painless as possible. So starting with the right setup, this is where a lot of anglers can make this harder than it needs to be. Don't start with little tiny lures, right? Or super thin line. Those two things can make it very difficult, right? We want to kind of keep it simple. So for your rod, you want a medium or a medium heavy rod that's around 7 feet long. And then you want a regular low profile bait caster. And then for the line, you want to go fairly heavy to start with. You want to go with 15 to 20 pound mono or copolymer. Don't start with fluoro. It can get really springy. It has a lot of memory. Or if you prefer braid, go with 40 pound plus, 40, 50, 65, if that's your preference. Mono is cheap, it's forgiving, and it can be easier to deal with when you're learning thumb control, but it's not a requirement. You can learn on braid too. I use braid primarily. 90% of my rigs are braid or braid to a leader of some sort. The only thing when you're thinking about braid, just don't start with really thin braid. When you have thin braid, that thin braid, it will dig into the spool, and then you cast and it just kind of stops, right? You also, with thin braid, typically get more backlashes, and the backlashes are worse. And that thin braid, just not a great place to start. So go heavier if you're going to use braid. Like I said, 40 pound plus. And spooling the reel correctly is also very important. This is where anglers can create problems before they ever make a cast, right? So you tie the line to the spool with an arbor knot, just like you normally would. If you're using braid, you typically want to put on some backing first. So a little bit of mono, and then tie your braid to that mono. The reason for that is braid can slip on that spool. The second thing is, as you're putting it on, you want to make sure you're keeping constant tension so you get the line put on the spool under tension. And you can use, some sort of setup that holds the spool and adds tension. You can use your fingers. Some people will use a rag or a paper towel to hold it nice and tight so they don't burn their fingers as they're doing it. And the third thing about it is, if you are using your fingers, make sure you're holding your line straight in line with your guides. If you pull it to one side to add that tension, like that, or like that, what's going to happen is the line is going to stack on whichever side you're pulling it towards. So it needs to be straight down the middle as you're spooling it. And as far as filling the spool, you want to stop at about 1/8 of an inch before the spool is completely full. Some reels have, like this one, how it's silver showing you where to stop. So the spool is black and it has this silver anodized area that tells you to stop, but just about 1/8 of an inch. All right, real quick, if this is helping, hit subscribe. It helps the channel, it helps me build this content, and this is the type of content that this channel is built around. All right, let's jump back into it and talk about the baits you're gonna wanna start with. Okay, don't learn with the lightest lure in your box, right? You wanna start with something that's around 3/8 of an ounce. It's a good place to start, maybe even a 1/2 ounce. It gives you enough weight to load the rod and to pull the line off the spool without being too hard to control. Don't cast directly into the wind either. That will definitely cause issues with baits like this spinnerbait. The spinnerbait will catch that wind and it will kind of just hang there and the spool will keep spinning and you'll get a backlash. Right, so a smaller profile bait than the spinnerbait is good in that weight range, and just don't cast into the wind. You also want to start with kind of sidearm type casts instead of overhand casts. They'll keep the bait lower and they're easier to control. Now, as far as setting the reel in your brakes, when you're thinking about your magnetic brake, you're going to have a dial on the side of it like that, right? And so you want to set that about half or higher, so 50, 60, 70%. And you may also have a centrifugal brake. Some reels have one or the other, and some have both. So that's a centrifugal brake. And the same thing with that. You want to set that at about 50% or higher. Essentially, the more brake you have, the more it's slowing down the spool and making it easier to control while you're learning. You've got 3 things that control that spool. You've got the 2 brakes we just talked about. You've also got this knob right here, which is your tension control, and then you have your thumb. Tie the lure on you plan to practice with. Then you press the thumb bar, and you want the lure to fall smoothly and slowly. Let me see if I can show this right here. When you push that bar, that lure should fall smoothly and slowly. And that's where you want to start. And you control that with your tension knob right there. And then you're going to set your brakes higher than you think you need. Once again, 50, 60%. So if it goes to 10, set it at 5 or 6, maybe even 7. As your casts get better, you can start backing that brake off a little at a time. The goal isn't really maximum distance. The goal is just clean, repeatable casts. Now, your thumb is the real difference between a spinning reel and a bait caster. On a spinning reel, the line comes off in coils and the bell controls that, right? When the bell's closed, the line can't come off. When the bell's open, the line just comes off. On a bait caster, that spool keeps spinning. Your thumb is the last brake on the reel, right? So you don't need to mash your thumb down on that reel the whole time. Most of the time, you're just lightly riding that spool. And you stop it before the lure hits the water. This is probably what requires the most practice. And some of our newer bait casting reels have self-regulating brakes that make this even easier. So like the Daiwa has the SV system, and the Shimano has the DC and SBS systems. Cast King has a few different systems as well. So I think most manufacturers on some of their mid-range or higher-end reels have some of these self-regulating or automatic brakes that help with this. Now, as far as a thumb drill to help you, just to kind of get started with this, just to kind of feel what's going on, you can take a lure and you can press the thumb right here and stop it right before it hits the ground. All right. So just push the thumb bar and then stop it right before it hits the ground. That's just getting you used to watching that lure and knowing when to stop it. right? When to put your thumb down on that spool. You want to ride it the whole time and then stop right before it hits the ground. And that's just a little drill to help you kind of understand that thumb control. Just start with smooth casts. Don't try to launch an overhead cast across the lake on day one. A sidearm cast, like we said earlier, keeps that lure on a flatter path, makes the release easier, and lets you feel what the spool is doing easier. And just start with easy short casts first. Once those are clean, then start adding some distance. A lot of baitcaster problems happen when an angler just tries to throw the bait too hard. And you really don't gain that much by trying to just really power that cast. A smooth cast that loads that rod properly will go plenty far most of the time. And you're going to get backlashes. Everybody does. Experienced anglers get backlashes. When it happens, don't panic. And the worst thing that you can do when it happens is start pulling the line hard. Don't pull the line hard. You can start to pull it out, and when you feel some resistance, you will typically see a loop that's around that line on the spool. And you just grab that loop and kind of pick at it. And then you try gently to pull again. And you'll get those backlashes out. And you'll get good at it, and it won't take you long to do it. The goal is not 0 backlashes. Everyone gets them to some degree. The goal is fewer of them and smaller ones when they happen. So here's kind of the overview or the plan, right? Get yourself a low profile baitcaster, a medium to medium heavy, fast 7-foot rod, spool the reel with 15 to 20 pound mono or copolymer, or if you're going to use braid, 40 pound or bigger. Tie on a lure that's around 3/8 of an ounce. Set your brakes pretty high. Set the lure to fall slowly with your tension. Do the thumb drill, and then make short cast. Smooth sidearm cast, and just practice. After you start feeling comfortable, you can start backing those brakes off a little at a time. Now, everybody uses some brake. Typically, the goal is just to get the brakes where they work well for you, not down to 0. And this takes a little time. You're not going to become a baitcaster expert overnight, but it's not going to take nearly as long as you think. And then, use your spinning gear when it makes sense, and use baitcasters when they give you an advantage. Once you understand the setup, the brakes, and the thumb, the switch really isn't all that complicated. Subscribe if this helps, and drop a comment. I answer them all. Do you use spinning gear, baitcasters, or both? All right, everybody. We'll see you on the next one.